My sister shoved me hard against the altar, her nails digging into my arm as she desperately pointed at the scarred, brooding tiger Beastman. "I choose him!" she screamed, her eyes manic with greed. The crowd gasped. She had just abandoned the twin werewolves she'd been courting for months. Sienna looked back at me, a smug, triumphant smirk painted on her face. She thought she was stealing my glorious, billionaire future. She thought she was leaving me with the trash. I lowered my head to hide my smile. What she didn't know was that we had both been reborn. The deafening roar of the Cresthaven town hall snapped me back to reality. The smell of cheap cologne, anxious sweat, and heavy pine filled my lungs. I blinked against the harsh fluorescent lights, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Just seconds ago, I had been lying on the cold marble floor of a sprawling mansion, coughing up blood, while the venom my sister slipped into my tea stopped my heart. I remembered the agonizing pain, the cold indifference in Sienna's eyes as she watched me die, and the heavy, suffocating scent of tiger musk that permeated my personal hell. But now I was standing upright. My skin wasn't pale and bruised. It was flush with the warmth of youth. I looked down at my hands, no scars, no tracking rings, no gold chains. I was wearing the simple white linen dress of the mating draft. It was June 14th, the day that dictated the rest of our lives. "Charlotte, move!" a sharp voice hissed in my ear. Before I could even process the miracle of my rebirth, a shoulder slammed into mine. Sienna, my twin sister, pushed past me with a frantic, desperate energy. Her blonde hair whipped around as she scrambled up the wooden steps toward the raised dais where the unregistered male shifters stood waiting. For the past 6 months, Sienna had been attached to the hip of Leon and Wyatt Blackwell, twin wolf shifters from the poor side of the boundary line. Everyone in town expected her to claim them. Shifter twins were rare, and claiming 2 mates was a heavy burden. But Sienna had reveled in their undivided, absolute devotion until today. Because today, Sienna remembered what I remembered. She remembered the future. In our previous life, Sienna had chosen Leon and Wyatt. I, left with the scraps, was paired with the terrifying, scarred outsider who had just moved to town, Damien Rousseau, a tiger beastman. In that life, Damien had risen from underground street fights to become the wealthiest, most powerful alpha in the state. I became his Luna, dripping in diamonds, photographed on red carpets, the envy of every woman in Cresthaven. Sienna, meanwhile, had struggled in a cramped trailer with the Blackwell twins, whose wolf forms had stunted and failed to mature, leaving them stuck working minimum-wage mechanic jobs. Her jealousy had festered into a toxic, lethal hatred, culminating in my murder. "I choose him!" Sienna screamed now, her voice echoing in the sudden, stunned silence of the hall. Her finger was pointed dead at Damien. Damien stood in the shadows of the stage. He was massive, wearing a torn leather jacket, his face marred by fresh bruises and a jagged scar over his left eye. He looked like a feral criminal. He looked exactly as he had on this day in our past life. Mayor Hamilton dropped his clipboard, staring at Sienna in shock. "Sienna? Are you certain? The Blackwell brothers are right here. You've submitted the preliminary courting papers for—" "I don't care about the papers!" Sienna snapped, her voice shrill. She practically threw herself at Damien, grabbing his thick, muscular arm. She looked back over her shoulder at me, and our eyes met. The look she gave me chilled me to the bone, but it also confirmed my theory. The absolute triumph, the malicious glee, the greedy anticipation in her stare she had come back to. She thought she was hijacking my timeline. She thought she was taking the billionaire king. I immediately lowered my head, letting my hair fall over my face to hide the absolute uncontrollable relief that washed over me. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted copper, desperate to keep myself from laughing out loud. "Oh, Sienna," I thought. "You stupid, greedy girl." She only saw the magazine covers of my past life. She only saw the sports cars and the penthouses. She didn't know that Damien Russo was a monster. She didn't know that his business empires were fronts for brutal, illegal blood sports. She didn't know that behind closed doors, his tiger beast was violently possessive, and that if I even looked out a window too long, he would lock me in a windowless room for days. She didn't know that the designer scarves I wore were to hide the permanent bruises on my throat. She thought I lived in a fairy tale. I had lived in a high-security prison, and now, she had just volunteered to take my place. Well, Mayor Hamilton stammered, recovering his composure. If the choice is made, Damien Russo, do you accept Sienna as your mate? Damien looked down at Sienna. His amber eyes were cold, calculating, and inherently predatory. He let out a low, rumbling growl that made the humans in the front row flinch. Fine, he grunted. He didn't look happy. He looked like a beast, claiming a piece of meat. Sienna didn't seem to care. She was already mentally spending his future millions. Then that leaves Charlotte, the mayor said, his voice laced with pity as he turned to me. The crowd parted slightly. At the far end of the stage stood Leon and Wyatt. They looked utterly devastated. Wyatt, the slightly taller of the two, had his fists clenched so tight, his knuckles were stark white, his jaw trembling with the effort of holding back a betrayed snarl. Leon stood perfectly still, his eyes hollow, staring at the floor as if his entire world had just collapsed. They had loved Sienna. They had given her everything they had. And she had just thrown them away like garbage in front of the entire town. I took a deep breath, smoothing down the front of my dress, and walked forward. The whispers began immediately. Poor Charlotte, stuck with the Blackwell rejects. Sienna totally screwed her over. Those twins don't even have a pack. They can barely afford groceries. I ignored them all. I walked straight up to the stage, stopping right in front of the twins. Up close, they were breathtaking. Even under the grime of their mechanic work, Leon had soft, wavy brown hair and deep, sorrowful green eyes. Wyatt had sharper features, his hair cut shorter, his eyes a piercing, intense hazel. In the past life, Sienna's constant nagging, emotional abuse, and infidelity had broken their spirits, preventing their wolves from ever finding an anchor to fully mature. I wasn't Sienna. I reached out, taking Leon's right hand and Wyatt's left. The moment my skin touched theirs, a jolt of pure, crackling electricity shot up my arms. Both brothers gasped, their heads snapping up to look at me in shock. The mate bond, it was dormant, but the spark was undeniable. I choose them, I said. My voice clear, steady, and loud enough for the entire hall to hear. I choose Leon and Wyatt Blackwell. Wyatt swallowed hard, looking at me with a mixture of distrust and desperate hope. You don't have to do this out of pity, Charlotte, he muttered, his voice raw. It's not pity, Wyatt, I said softly, squeezing their hands. Let's go home. The town of Cresthaven loved a spectacle, and my sister had just given them the show of the decade. As I turned to lead Leon and Wyatt out of the hall, the sea of judging eyes parted for us. I kept my head high, my posture perfectly straight. I could feel the twins radiating a mixture of humiliation and confusion behind me. Their wolves were entirely unsettled, their pride wounded by Sienna's public rejection. As we reached the heavy oak doors of the exit, a hand clamped down on my shoulder. Going so soon, sis? I turned to see Sienna. Damien stood a few paces behind her, his arms crossed over his massive chest, glaring at the room like he wanted to tear everyone's throat out. Sienna stepped close, leaning in so only I could hear her. I know what you're thinking, Charlotte, she whispered, her breath hot against my ear. You think you can play the martyr, but you're going to rot in that filthy shack in the woods. I'm going to have the world. I'm taking everything that was supposed to be yours. I looked at her. Truly looked at her. Her eyes were wide with a feverish, toxic ambition. She had murdered me for this. For a man who would break her bones for looking at another man. I allowed a brief, trembling smile to touch my lips, playing the part of the defeated sister perfectly. Congratulations, Sienna, I said softly. I hope he treats you exactly how you deserve to be treated. A flicker of confusion crossed her face at my words, but it was quickly replaced by a sneer. She flipped her blonde hair over her shoulder and strutted back to her beast. "Let's get out of here," Leon murmured, his hand gently touching my lower back. The contrast between his gentle touch and Damien's bruising grip in my past life almost brought tears to my eyes. We walked out into the cool evening air. The Blackwell brothers led me to a rusting, beat-up 1998 Ford pickup truck. Wyatt opened the passenger door for me, his jaw tight. He wouldn't meet my eyes. The drive to the edge of the whispering woods was suffocatingly silent. I sat in the middle, the cab smelling heavily of motor oil, pine, and the musky, distressed scent of two depressed werewolves. I knew their property. It was a small, dilapidated cabin sitting on 5 acres of overgrown land. In my past life, Sienna had spent her first night here screaming about the dust and the lack of hot water, demanding they sleep outside. When the truck finally crunched to a halt on the gravel driveway, the twins sat still for a moment. "Listen, Charlotte." Wyatt finally spoke, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tight the plastic creaked. "We know this isn't what you wanted. We know you got stuck with us. You can take the bedroom. Leon and I will sleep in the barn. Tomorrow, we can go to the mayor and file for a dissolution of the bond." "No." Both of them turned to look at me, stunned. "No dissolution," I said, opening my door and stepping out into the damp grass. "I chose you. I meant it." I walked up the creaky wooden steps of the cabin and pushed the door open. It was exactly as I imagined. Dust coated the cheap furniture, the floorboards were uneven, and the kitchen consisted of a hot plate and an ancient refrigerator. But it was quiet. It was safe. There were no hidden cameras. There were no locks on the outside of the bedroom doors. I dropped my small duffel bag on the worn-out sofa. The twins lingered in the doorway, watching me like I was an unpredictable wild animal. "Have you guys eaten?" I asked, rolling up the sleeves of my white linen dress. Leon blinked, thoroughly bewildered. No. We were at the hall all day." "Right. Sit down," I commanded gently. I opened the fridge. It was depressing. Half a carton of eggs, some wilted spinach, and a package of cheap ground beef. It wasn't the Wagyu steak Damien used to have his private chef's cook. But to me, it looked like absolute freedom. I found a cast-iron skillet, turned on the hot plate, and got to work. I chopped the spinach, seasoned the beef with the few spices I could find in the cupboard, and began cooking a massive scramble. As the smell of cooking meat filled the small cabin, I could hear the subtle shifting behind me. In werewolf culture, the provision of food by a mate is a deeply primal, soothing act. It establishes pack dynamic, safety, and care. In the past life, Sienna had starved them emotionally and physically, refusing to cook, demanding they spend their meager paychecks on takeout for her while they ate scraps. I plated the food into 2 large bowls and set them on the wobbly wooden dining table. "Eat," I said, pulling up a chair for myself with a smaller portion. Wyatt and Leon slowly sat down. They looked at the food, then at me. Wyatt took a hesitant bite. His eyes widened slightly. It was basic food, but he ate it like he was starving. Leon ate more slowly, his green eyes watching me with intense calculation. "Why are you doing this?" Leon asked, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. "Sienna humiliated us. She proved we aren't worth anything. Why aren't you crying? Why aren't you angry?" I set my fork down and looked directly into Leon's eyes. I had to choose my words carefully. I couldn't tell them I was from the future. "Sienna only values things that shine right now," I said quietly. "She looks at Damien Russo and sees power. I look at him and see violence. She looked at you too and saw poverty." I reached across the table, placing one hand over Wyatt's and the other over Leon's. "I look at you both, and I see loyalty. I see potential. Sienna didn't abandon you, boys. She set you free. And she set me free to find you." Wyatt stopped chewing. A ragged, emotional breath hitched in his chest. Leon's hand turned over, his rough fingers interlacing with mine. For the first time since the ceremony, the oppressive scent of distress in the room began to fade, replaced by the rich, warm scent of earth, rain, and blooming alpha energy. I had planted the first seed. Now, I just had to make sure they survived the night. Night fell over Cresthaven like a heavy velvet blanket. Through the single clouded window of the cabin, I could see the massive, silver orb of the full moon rising over the whispering woods. Miles away, in the penthouses of downtown, I knew exactly what was happening. It was the night of the full moon. Damien's tiger would be restless, aggressive, and out of control. Sienna was likely expecting a romantic, billionaire evening with champagne. Instead, she was about to be locked in a panic room while a massive, feral tiger destroyed the penthouse. Terrified for her life, the thought brought a dark, grim satisfaction to my chest. But my focus was entirely on the two men pacing the floor of the small cabin. The first full moon after a mating draft is notoriously difficult for shifters. The sudden influx of a mate's scent triggers a biological need to claim, to protect, and to assert dominance. For Leon and Wyatt, who had been brutally rejected and then abruptly claimed by me, their internal magic was in absolute chaos. Wyatt was pacing in front of the cold fireplace, his breathing ragged. His hazel eyes were flashing gold in the dim light. Leon sat on the edge of the sofa, his head in his hands, a low, agonizing groan rumbling in his chest. "We need to go outside," Wyatt ground out, gripping the mantel so hard the wood splintered. "Charlotte, lock the door. Don't come out. We don't have control tonight. The rejection, the bond, it's tearing us apart." In my previous life, Sienna had locked them out. She had screamed at them, calling them monsters, denied the soothing presence of their mate during a critical shift. Their wolves had turned on themselves. Internalizing the trauma, they had shifted into scrawny, malformed wolves, their alpha bloodlines permanently suppressed. I stood up from the kitchen chair. "I'm not locking you out. Charlotte, please!" Leon gasped, dropping to his knees on the floor, his hands clutching his stomach as the sound of bone shifting popped sickeningly in the quiet room. "We might hurt you. We've never shifted together with a mate before. We're too unstable." "You're not unstable," I said, walking toward them. "You're starving." While locked in Damien's library for years, I had read every book on shifter history to maintain my sanity. I had learned things the modern packs of Cresthaven had long forgotten. I learned about the Silvermane Kings, an ancient royal lineage of dual alpha lichens. They were legendary for their immense size, their silver coats, and their unmatched strength. The defining trait of a Silvermane descendant? Twins. Twin males who required a willing, fearless mate to anchor their immense power during their awakening. The Blackwells weren't rejects, they were sleeping kings. And Sienna had kept them sedated with her toxicity. "Look at me," I commanded, dropping to my knees right between them. Wyatt fell to the floor next to Leon, his face contorted in agony as fur began to sprout along his jawline. "Get away!" he snarled, though the sound was laced with fear, not aggression. "I trust you," I said firmly. I took my thumbnail, which I had sharpened earlier on a stone outside, and pressed it hard into the fleshy part of my own palm. I dragged it across, opening a shallow, stinging cut. Fresh blood welled up. The scent of it, sweet, metallic, and undeniably mine, hit the air. Both brothers froze. Their golden eyes snapped to my bleeding hand. The feral panic in their gaze was instantly overridden by the primal, inescapable instinct of the mate bond. "Anchor to me," I whispered, holding my hand out. "Let the wolf out, Leon. Let it out, Wyatt. I'm right here, I'm not leaving." Leon moved first. He crawled forward, his chest heaving, and pressed his face against my palm. He didn't bite. He simply inhaled the scent of my blood, his tongue darting out to gently lap at the cut. The moment he tasted my blood, a massive, thunderous shockwave of energy blasted through the small cabin. The windows rattled. Wyatt followed, pressing his forehead against my arm, taking in my scent, grounding himself in the reality that I was there, I was bleeding for them, and I wasn't afraid. The horrific sounds of bones breaking stopped. Instead, a smooth, powerful transition took over. I watched in absolute awe as the two mechanics from the poor side of town expanded. Their clothes shredded away as muscle and bone grew at an exponential rate. They didn't turn into the regular, pony-sized wolves of the Cresthaven packs. They kept growing. Within seconds, two monstrous, 8-foot-tall lichens stood in my living room, their heads brushing the low ceiling. They stood on two legs, their bodies covered in thick, iridescent silver fur that caught the moonlight pouring through the window. Their claws were like obsidian daggers, and their chests were barrel-thick with pure, unadulterated muscle. They were magnificent. They were terrifying. They were gods. The twin lichens looked down at me, their massive jaws slightly parted, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. But their eyes, one pair deep green, the other intense hazel, were perfectly clear. There was no feral madness, only absolute clarity, and an ocean of devotion. The Wyatt wolf lowered his massive, terrifying head and gently nudged my shoulder, a rumbling purr vibrating through the floorboards. The Leon wolf stepped over me, standing guard, his sheer size dwarfing the entire room. I looked at the magnificent mythical beast standing in my rundown living room, and a fierce, triumphant laugh finally bubbled up from my chest. "Oh, Sienna," I thought, looking out the window toward the city skyline. "You really thought you took the prize. You threw away the kings of the shifter world for a rabbit alley cat." My new life had officially begun. And this time, I held the winning hand. I woke up to the smell of freshly brewed black coffee and sizzling bacon. For a terrifying, disorienting second, my mind threw me back to my past life. I braced myself for the sound of Damien's heavy, angry footsteps, for the inevitable crash of breaking glass that usually accompanied his morning hangovers. But as I opened my eyes, the rustic wooden beams of the cabin's ceiling greeted me. I was lying on the worn sofa, covered in a heavy, knitted quilt. The memories of last night, the blood, the earth-shattering shift, the twin lichens standing guard over me came rushing back in a tidal wave of adrenaline. I sat up, pushing the quilt aside. "Morning, beautiful." I turned toward the small kitchen. Leon and Wyatt were standing by the stove, and the breath caught in my throat. The transformation hadn't just been in their wolf forms, it had fundamentally altered their human bodies as well. They were always handsome, but the suppressed stress and malnutrition of their past life had kept them lean and hollow-cheeked. Now, they were a terrifying masterpiece of genetics. They had grown at least 2 inches taller, their shoulders impossibly broad, stretching the fabric of the faded t-shirts they had thrown on. Their posture was completely different. Gone was the defensive slouch of the town rejects. They stood with the effortless, relaxed grace of apex predators. Wyatt set a mug of coffee on the small table. His hazel eyes, previously clouded with anxiety, were razor-sharp and glowing with a faint, residual gold ring around the pupil. "How do you feel?" Leon asked, walking over and kneeling in front of the sofa. He took my hand, his thumb gently tracing the bandage I had wrapped around my palm last night. His touch was reverent. "I feel like I'm dreaming," I whispered, staring at them. "You two. Last night, you were lichens." Wyatt leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. A slow, confident smile spread across his face. "We didn't know, Charlotte. We swear. Our wolves. They've been trapped in a state of suspended animation since we were teenagers. We always felt wrong, like our skins didn't fit. When you bled for us, when you anchored us without a shred of fear, it broke the dam," Leon finished softly. The genetic memories flooded in. "We are the last living descendants of the Silvermane bloodline." Before I could respond, the sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway made all 3 of us freeze. Leon and Wyatt didn't just turn their heads, their entire bodies shifted, instantly placing themselves between me and the door. The protective instinct was overwhelming, a physical wave of heat radiating from their bodies. I peeked around Leon's massive shoulder. A sleek, black Mercedes Maybach had just parked next to their rusting Ford pickup. A tall, impeccably dressed older man stepped out, carrying a pristine leather briefcase. He looked completely out of place in front of the dilapidated cabin. "Who is that?" I asked. Wyatt's eyes narrowed, his nostrils flaring as he took in the man's scent. "I don't know him, but he smells like old paper and expensive ink." Leon opened the door before the man even reached the steps. The older man stopped, looking up at the towering twins. For a moment, his professional facade cracked, his eyes widening as he took in their sheer size and the oppressive, undeniable aura of alpha dominance they were leaking into the air. He hastily removed his bowler hat, bowing his head slightly in an ancient gesture of shifter respect. "Leon and Wyatt Blackwell?" the man asked, his voice trembling slightly. "Who's asking?" Wyatt growled. "My name is Reginald Finch. I am the senior partner at Finch, Sterling and Hayes," he said, holding out a business card. "I have been waiting for 35 years for the biometric alarms in my firm's subterranean vault to trigger. Last night, at exactly 11:42 p.m., the ancestral magic tied to the Silvermane bloodline registered a full mature shift." Reginald looked past them, his eyes landing on me. "And it appears you have found your Luna. May I come in? We have a tremendous amount of paperwork to discuss." We sat around the wobbly wooden table, which felt even smaller with the twins taking up so much space. Reginald opened his briefcase and pulled out thick stacks of vellum paper bound in leather. As he spoke, the reality of what Sienna had thrown away hit me with the force of a freight train. The twins weren't just descendants of royalty. They were the sole beneficiaries of the Sterling Blackwell Trust. Decades ago, their grandfather, anticipating a purge of the royal lines, had liquidated the family's immense assets and hidden them in a magical trust that could only be accessed when the heirs achieved their true lichen form. Because your wolves remained dormant, the trust remained sealed. Your parents died before they could access it, and the pack assumed the bloodline was a failure, Reginald explained, pushing a set of solid gold, heavily engraved keys across the table. "As of this morning, gentlemen, the seals are broken. You are the legal owners of Blackwell Enterprises, a controlling stake in the Cresthaven First National Bank, and approximately $2 billion in liquid assets." I felt the blood drain from my face. $2 billion. Damien Rousseau's illegal empire was worth, at best, a few $100 million. Sienna had murdered me for a fraction of what was currently sitting on my cheap kitchen table. "There's more," Reginald said, sliding a sleek black titanium credit card toward me. "The trust specifically allocates an immediate, unrestricted Luna's dowry upon the successful anchoring of the Alphas. This is yours, Miss Charlotte." Wyatt looked at the card, then at me. His fierce, predatory eyes softened entirely. "Take it," he murmured. "We owe you our lives, our wolves, everything." I reached out, my fingers brushing the cool metal of the card. I thought about the cheap linen dress I was wearing. I thought about Sienna's smug face at the ceremony. "Mr. Finch," I said, a slow, wicked smile creeping onto my face. "How fast can we get an appointment at the promenade?" The promenade was Cresthaven's equivalent of Rodeo Drive. It was a sprawling, pristine avenue, lined with towering glass storefronts, designer boutiques, and security guards in tailored suits. It was where the pack alphas, the old money, and the elite shifters flaunted their status. In my past life, Damien had dragged me here weekly, treating me like a life-size dress-up doll. He would pick out agonizingly tight, revealing dresses to show me off, ignoring my discomfort. Today, I was the one leading the charge. Leon and Wyatt flanked me as we walked out of Bespoke by Laurent, Cresthaven's most exclusive tailor. The transformation was nothing short of breathtaking. The mechanic grease and ragged t-shirts were gone. Leon wore a charcoal three-piece suit that perfectly accentuated his broad shoulders and narrow waist, a silver pocket watch chain catching the afternoon sun. Wyatt had opted for a sleek, midnight blue suit. No tie, his top two buttons undone, giving him an air of dangerous, careless elegance. People were literally stopping on the sidewalks to stare at them. The latent lichen energy they gave off made the lesser shifters in the crowd subconsciously bow their heads as we passed. And me? I was wearing a stunning, flowing emerald silk dress from House of Vesper, paired with a subtle, yet blindingly expensive diamond collar necklace that Leon had insisted on buying the moment he saw it in a window display. I feel like I'm wearing a house, Wyatt grumbled, adjusting his cuffs, though the smirk on his face betrayed his amusement. You look like a king, I corrected him, looping my arm through his. Both of you, Leon chuckled, wrapping his arm around my waist, pulling me close. His body was a furnace of comforting heat. I think the town is having a hard time computing this. I just saw Mrs. Gable from the bakery walk into a streetlight. I laughed, the sound bright and genuine. I hadn't laughed like that in years. But my laughter died the moment we turned the corner toward the outdoor plaza. Sitting at a premium table outside the Café de Lune was Sienna. Even from 50 feet away, I could see the cracks in her newly acquired billionaire facade. She was wearing a violently pink, overly branded designer dress that screamed nouveau riche, but her posture was rigid. She had heavy concealer under her eyes, and she kept checking her phone with frantic, jerky movements. Across from her sat Damien. He looked exactly as he always did, brooding, massive, and irritated. He was glaring at his phone, completely ignoring her. As we walked closer, the wind shifted. Sienna's head snapped up. Her eyes locked onto me first. I saw the immediate sneer form on her lips, ready to spit some venom about me coming to town to beg. But then, her gaze shifted to the two towering, godlike men flanking me. I watched in real time, as her brain completely short-circuited. Her jaw literally dropped. The smugness melted off her face, replaced by absolute, unadulterated shock. She looked at Leon's tailored charcoal suit, at Wyatt's devastatingly handsome, arrogant smirk, and then down to the emerald silk and diamonds I was wearing. We stopped 10 feet from their table. Sienna, I said, my voice smooth as glass. Damien, enjoying the afternoon? Damien looked up from his phone. His amber tiger eyes narrowed, sweeping over us. He was an alpha, highly attuned to power dynamics. I saw the exact moment his instincts registered the threat. The muscles in his massive arms tensed, and a low, involuntary growl rumbled in the back of his throat. Sienna stood up so fast her chair screeched against the pavement. What? What is this? She stammered, her voice shrill, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at us. Did you rent those clothes? Did you steal money to come down here and pretend you aren't living in a shack? Wyatt let out a low, dark chuckle that vibrated through the air. Hello to you too, Sienna. You're looking tired. Sienna flushed a furious red. Shut up, Wyatt. You're a broke mechanic. You can't afford a button on that suit. She turned to Damien, her voice pitching into a desperate whine. Damien, tell security to throw them out. They're trespassing in the VIP district. Damien didn't look at her. His eyes were locked dead on Leon. In the shifter world, eye contact between alphas is a direct challenge. In my past life, Leon and Wyatt would have dropped their gazes instantly, their suppressed wolves too weak to withstand a predator like Damien. But today, Leon didn't look away. Instead, Leon's emerald green eyes flared with a sudden, blinding golden light. He stood perfectly still, but the air around him seemed to grow heavy, thick with the scent of ozone and crushed pine. Is there a problem here, Russo? Leon asked. His voice wasn't a shout, but it carried a terrifying subterranean resonance that made the coffee cups on Sienna's table rattle. Damien stood up, pushing his massive frame to its full height. You reek of stolen magic, pup. Damien spat, stepping forward, his aggressive tiger aura flaring out in an attempt to crush Leon into submission. I don't know what trick you played to clean up, but you're still bottom feeders in my city. Your city? Wyatt mused, stepping up shoulder to shoulder with his brother. The hazel in his eyes vanished, replaced by the same terrifying, glowing gold. That's funny. My lawyer, Reginald Finch, informed me this morning that we own the ground you're standing on. Literally. We bought the deed to the plaza an hour ago. Sienna gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Liar! You're lying! Damien is the richest man in Cresthaven. Not anymore, little bird. Wyatt smirked. Damien's face twisted into a mask of pure feral rage. His ego, fragile and violent, couldn't handle the disrespect. His fingernails elongated into thick, curved tiger claws. I'll rip your throats out right here, he roared, lunging forward. The plaza erupted into screams. Humans and lesser shifters scattered in terror as the billionaire tiger Beastman lost his temper in broad daylight. Damien moved with terrifying speed, his massive fist aimed directly at Leon's face. In my previous life, I had seen that fist shatter concrete. I had felt the back of it against my own ribs. My breath hitched, a phantom pain echoing in my chest. But Leon didn't flinch. He didn't even shift. With a movement so fast it was a blur, Leon simply raised his left hand and caught Damien's fist in his open palm. A sickening crack echoed across the stone plaza. Damien stopped dead in his tracks. The momentum of his lunge was entirely arrested by one hand. The tiger Beastman stared at Leon's hand, his amber eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and sudden paralyzing agony. Leon hadn't just blocked the punch. He was crushing Damien's knuckles. You have a very bad habit of letting your temper control your beast, Russo, Leon said, his voice entirely devoid of exertion. That makes you a liability, not an alpha. Wyatt stepped forward, closing the distance. He didn't raise a hand. He didn't need to. Wyatt unleashed the full, unfiltered pressure of his Lycan Alpha aura. It was a physical force, invisible but heavy as a collapsed star. It hit Damien like a physical blow. The tiger Beastman's knees buckled. Damien let out a strangled gasp. Trying to fight it. Trying to push his tiger forward to meet the challenge. But a solitary tiger, no matter how vicious, cannot stand against the ancient, royal command of a Silvermane Lycan. Slowly, agonizingly, Damien was forced downward. His joints popped. His chest heaved as he fought for air that suddenly felt too thick to breathe. Kneel, Wyatt whispered. The command laced with absolute ancestral authority. Damien hit the pavement. He was on his knees, his head bowed, physically unable to look up at the twins. The proud, terrifying monster who had haunted my previous life, the man Sienna had murdered me for, was kneeling in the dirt in the middle of the promenade. Sienna stood frozen by the table, her face ashen white. Her chest was heaving in panic. She looked from the kneeling Damien to the godlike twins, the realization of her catastrophic mistake finally piercing through her delusion. She had abandoned dormant kings for a rabid alley cat. Wyatt, Leon, let him go, I said softly, stepping forward. Instantly, the oppressive aura vanished. Leon released Damien's hand, stepping back to my side. Damien collapsed onto his hands, coughing violently, nursing his crushed hand. Completely humiliated in front of half the town. I walked over to Sienna. She shrank back, her eyes wide with fear, expecting me to hit her. Instead, I reached out and gently straightened the collar of her violently pink dress. You look exhausted, Sienna, I murmured, keeping my voice so low only she could hear. Full moons with a tiger are rough, aren't they? The panic room gets so cold when he's out there tearing up the furniture. Sienna's eyes snapped to mine, pure horror dawning in her gaze. How could I know about the panic room? How could I know about the violence of the night before? You, she breathed, her voice trembling. How do you? You wanted my life, Sienna, I smiled, a genuine, terrifying smile that reached my eyes. Congratulations. You have it. Enjoy every second of it. I turned my back on her, slipping my hands back into the crooks of Leon and Wyatt's arms. Let's go home, boys, I said loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. I'm suddenly craving a very expensive steak. We walked away, leaving Sienna trembling next to the broken beast she had chosen. The whispers of the crowd were already starting, but I didn't care. The past was finally dead, and the future belonged entirely to us. The transition from the rusted shack in the Whispering Woods to the ancestral Sterling Blackwell estate was nothing short of cinematic. Located on a sprawling 300-acre cliffside overlooking the roaring Atlantic, the estate had been sealed by magic and heavy iron gates for decades. When Leon and Wyatt finally placed their hands on the biometric monolith at the entrance, the ancient wards shattered like glass, welcoming its king's home. The manor itself was a masterpiece of Gothic architecture mixed with modern luxury. Vaulted ceilings, sweeping mahogany staircases, and floor-to-ceiling windows that bathed the rooms in natural light. But the most impressive room wasn't the grand ballroom or the indoor heated pool. It was the war room. For the past 3 weeks, this room had been the nerve center of our revenge. I stood by the massive, polished obsidian conference table, a steaming cup of chamomile tea in my hands. Spread across the digital smart table were blueprints, stock portfolios, and highly classified financial documents. Reginald Finch, ever the quintessential lawyer, was adjusting his spectacles as he pointed to a red, plummeting graph. Leon stood behind me, his massive chest pressed comfortingly against my back, his chin resting on the crown of my head. His scent crushed pine and rain was a constant anchor. Wyatt was pacing the length of the room, a glass of amber bourbon in his hand, his hazel eyes glowing with a predatory, calculating light. "Russo's legitimate fronts are hemorrhaging cash," Reginald stated, his voice tight, with professional satisfaction. His real estate holding company, Apex Developments, was highly leveraged. When Blackwell Enterprises aggressively bought up the municipal bonds in the downtown sector, we effectively choked his credit lines. The banks called in his loans yesterday. Wyatt stopped pacing, taking a slow sip of his bourbon. And the underground fighting rings? Panic. Reginald smiled thinly. With his legitimate money frozen, he can't pay the bribes to the local precincts or the shifter council inspectors. His fighters are walking out. Damian Russo is bleeding out, financially speaking. I leaned back against Leon, a dark, deeply satisfied smile playing on my lips. In my past life, Damian had controlled everything. He had bought my silence with threats and isolated me with his boundless wealth. To watch his empire be dismantled, piece by piece, without a single punch being thrown, was the sweetest nectar I had ever tasted. "He's getting desperate," Leon rumbled, his deep voice vibrating through my spine. "A cornered tiger is unpredictable. He's not going to just watch his empire burn, Charlotte. We need to double the security detail around you." "I'm not afraid of him anymore," I said, turning my head to look up at Leon's strong, chiseled jaw. "Not with you two here." Wyatt set his glass down with a heavy thud. "You shouldn't be. But Sienna, she's a different story." The security feed at the front gates caught a silver Porsche circling the perimeter for the last 4 hours. I raised an eyebrow. Sienna. Of course she was circling. She was suffocating. Through the town gossip mill, I had heard exactly how her fairy tale was playing out. Damian, enraged by his sudden financial freefall, and humiliated by the twins at the promenade, had taken his fury out on his surroundings. Sienna had spent the last 2 weeks trapped in his penthouse, dodging thrown crystal decanters and screaming matches. The designer clothes and the caviar couldn't mask the absolute terror she was living in. She was experiencing the exact hell she had condemned me to in our first life. And now, she was looking for an exit strategy. "Let her in," I said softly. Both twins stiffened. "Charlotte, absolutely not," Leon growled, his alpha instincts instantly flaring at the thought of a threat entering our territory. "She tried to ruin you. She abandoned us. She doesn't get to step foot in this house. Please." I placed a hand over Leon's, tracing the prominent veins on his knuckles. "She needs to see it. She needs to see what she threw away. It's the final nail in the coffin. If we just ignore her, she'll concoct some delusion that we're keeping her out because we're afraid. I want her to walk into this house and realize she means absolutely nothing." Wyatt looked at me, a slow, wicked grin spreading across his face. He understood the psychological warfare perfectly. "Finch," Wyatt called out to the lawyer. "Tell the gate guards to open the iron doors. Escort Miss Sienna to the grand foyer." 10 minutes later, I stood at the top of the sweeping mahogany staircase. Leon and Wyatt flanked me, radiating silent, overwhelming power. The heavy oak front doors opened, and Sienna stepped inside. She looked a wreck. The expensive blowout she had sported weeks ago was frizzy and unkempt. She was wearing a trench coat, tightly belted, her eyes darting nervously around the cavernous, opulent foyer. When she looked up and saw us, the breath literally left her lungs. She took in the crystal chandeliers, the priceless art lining the walls, and the sheer, unquestionable majesty of the two lichens standing beside me. "Charlotte," Sienna croaked, her voice trembling. She took a hesitant step up the stairs. "Charlotte, please? You have to help me." "Stop right there!" Wyatt's voice cracked like a whip, echoing off the marble floors. He didn't raise his voice, but the alpha command was so absolute that Sienna's knees buckled slightly, forcing her to freeze on the third step. "What do you want, Sienna?" I asked, my voice completely devoid of emotion. Tears welled up in her eyes, spilling over her cheeks. It was a masterclass in manipulation, but I knew her too well. "It's Damien," she sobbed. "He's crazy, Charlotte. He's losing his mind. He lost 3 of his properties this week, and he blames Leon and Wyatt. He hit me." She pulled back the collar of her trench coat, revealing a dark, purple bruise blossoming along her collarbone. A flash of genuine memory hit me, the phantom ache of my own ribs from a life she had stolen. A tiny part of my humanity pitied her, but the larger, battle-hardened part of my soul remembered the venom in my tea. "I'm sorry he hurt you," I said calmly. "But you chose him. You pointed at him on that stage and said you wanted him." "I made a mistake!" she screamed, her facade breaking into raw, ugly desperation. She looked past me, her tear-filled eyes locking onto Leon and Wyatt. "Leon! Wyatt! Please. We had a bond. You loved me. For 6 months, you loved me." I was confused. I was scared of the poverty, but I see now. I see the truth. She was practically begging, reaching her hands out toward them. "You're alphas. You're royalty. You can have more than one mate. Charlotte doesn't have to be the only one. Take me back. Please, save me from him." The silence that followed her plea was deafening. Leon looked down at her. There was no anger in his green eyes. There was no betrayal. No lingering heartbreak. There was only absolute, chilling apathy. "You never had a bond with us, Sienna," Leon said, his voice cold and flat. "You had a leash. You used our isolation to feed your ego. When Charlotte touched us, the earth moved. When you touched us, we just felt tired." Wyatt leaned over the marble banister, looking down at her like she was a stain on the rug. "You didn't come here because you realized you love us. You came here because you realized we're billionaires. You saw the gold, and you came running. You're a parasite." Sienna recoiled as if she had been physically struck. Her face twisted from desperate sorrow to venomous hatred in a fraction of a second. "You think you've won?" she spat, glaring up at me. "You think you're safe? Damien knows what you're doing to his businesses. He knows you're bleeding him. He's calling in the iron claws from the next state over. He's going to tear this mansion down to the foundation and drag you out by your hair, Charlotte." "Let him try," Wyatt chuckled darkly. "Security," Leon commanded into the silence. 2 massive guards, both imposing bear shifters, stepped out from the shadows of the hallway. "Escort Sienna off the property. If she comes within a mile of the gates again, arrest her for trespassing." "You're going to die, Charlotte!" Sienna shrieked as the guards grabbed her arms, dragging her backward toward the doors. "He's going to kill you! He's going to kill all of you!" The heavy oak doors slammed shut, cutting off her hysterical screams. I let out a slow breath, my hands gripping the marble banister. She had confirmed what we suspected. Damien was planning an all-out assault. "The iron claws," Wyatt mused, cracking his knuckles, the sound echoing sharply. Mercenaries. Cheap thugs for hire. Damien really is scraping the bottom of the barrel. He's going to attack during the eclipse tomorrow night, Leon said, his gaze fixed on the front doors. When the moon's magic is in flux and the town's wards are at their weakest, it's the only tactical advantage he has left. I turned to the twins, my heart hammering not with fear but with anticipation. What do we do? Leon and Wyatt looked at each other, a silent telepathic communication passing between the Silvermane brothers. When they looked back at me, their eyes were blazing with golden ancestral fire. We don't wait for him to attack our home, Leon said, a feral grin pulling at his lips. We take the fight to his front door, Wyatt finished. The night of the lunar eclipse hung over Cresthaven like a heavy, suffocating shroud. The moon was a bloody copper disk in the sky, casting eerie crimson shadows across the downtown district. The streets were entirely deserted. The Shifter Council had issued a strict curfew. Sensing the explosive tension brewing between the failing Russo Empire and the rising Blackwell dynasty, Damien's headquarters was located in the penthouse of the Apex Tower, a soaring skyscraper of glass and steel that he had built on the backs of extortion and illegal labor. We didn't sneak in through the loading dock. We didn't disable the security cameras. We walked right through the front doors. I wore a sleek, black leather jacket and dark jeans, my hair tied back tightly. Leon and Wyatt flanked me, wearing black tactical gear. Though no weapons were strapped to their belts. They didn't need them. Their bodies were the deadliest weapons on Earth. The lobby guard's 4 bulky wolf shifters moved to intercept us, drawing their firearms. "Stop right there!" the lead guard shouted, his hands trembling as he aimed his weapon at Leon's chest. Leon didn't even break his stride. He unleashed a localized, concentrated burst of his alpha aura. It hit the guards like a sonic boom. The men instantly collapsed to their knees, gasping for air, their weapons clattering uselessly onto the polished marble floor. Their suppressed wolves whimpered in submission to the Silvermane King. We stepped into the private executive elevator. Wyatt pressed the button for the penthouse, swiping a master override keycard Reginald Finch had acquired for us. "Are you ready for this, Charlotte?" Wyatt asked softly, the elevator humming as it shot upwards. "I've been ready since the day I died," I replied, my voice steady. The elevator chimed, and the titanium doors slid open. The penthouse was in ruins. The luxurious leather furniture was slashed to ribbons. Crystal decanters were shattered against the walls, and the massive panoramic windows were cracked. The place reeked of sour alcohol, blood, and the overwhelming foul stench of an unstable, rotting tiger beast. Standing in the center of the wreckage was Damien Russo. He was bare-chested, his body covered in sweat and bulging with unnatural, steroid-enhanced muscle. His fingernails were fully extended into jagged, yellowed claws. His amber eyes were completely dilated, swallowed by feral madness. Behind him, cowering in the corner of the room, clutching her bruised face, was Sienna. "I knew you'd come," Damien snarled, his voice distorted, a hideous blend of human speech and a tiger's roar. "I knew you couldn't resist gloating, you mutts." From the shadows of the hallways and adjacent rooms, the mercenaries emerged. The Iron Claws. There were at least 20 of them, rogue wolves, a few scarred bear shifters, and even a massive lumbering boar shifter. They were heavily armed with silver-laced chains, electrified batons, and spiked knuckles. "You took my money. You took my city!" Damien roared, spittle flying from his lips. He pointed a trembling, clawed finger at me. "And you, the little rat who thought she could play me. Sienna told me everything. How you manipulated the draft. How you knew things you shouldn't. You're a witch, and I'm going to rip you apart." "You're not touching her," Leon said. His voice was deathly calm. Damien laughed, a grating, unhinged sound. "There are 20 of us and 2 of you. Kill the brothers. Keep the girl alive for me." The mercenaries charged. What followed wasn't a fight. It was a massacre. It was the brutal, terrifying awakening of the Silvermane legend. Leon and Wyatt didn't shift fully into their massive lichen forms. The penthouse ceiling couldn't contain them. Instead, they triggered a partial shift. Their eyes flared blinding gold. Thick, iridescent silver fur erupted along their forearms and jaws. Their teeth elongated into razor-sharp fangs, and their hands morphed into lethal, bone-crushing claws. A rogue wolf lunged at Wyatt with an electrified baton. Wyatt sidestepped the attack with blinding speed, catching the mercenary by the throat and hurling him across the room with such force that the man shattered a marble pillar upon impact. Leon waded into the center of the fray like a god of war. A massive bear shifter swung a heavy silver chain at his head. Leon caught the chain, barehanded the silver, sizzling against his skin, though he didn't even flinch and yanked the bear forward, delivering a devastating, bone-shattering knee to the mercenary's chest. I stood near the elevator, protected by the invisible, impenetrable barrier of their alpha magic. I watched in awe as the twins dismantled Damien's private army in less than 2 minutes. They moved with perfect, lethal synchronization. Where Wyatt ducked, Leon struck. They were two halves of a devastating whole. Soon, the only sounds in the room were the groans of the incapacitated mercenaries and the heavy, ragged breathing of Damien Rousseau. Damien backed up, his feral confidence entirely shattered. He looked at his broken army, then at the two silver-furred monsters stalking slowly toward him. "No," Damien stammered, his bravado crumbling. "Wait! We can make a deal. I have offshore accounts I can give you." "We don't want your money, Rousseau," Wyatt growled, wiping a streak of blood from his cheek. "We already took it." Damien's eyes darted around the room, desperate for an escape. His gaze landed on Sienna, who was sobbing hysterically in the corner. In a flash of cowardly desperation, Damien lunged, grabbing Sienna by the hair and pulling her up, pressing a jagged claw against her throat. "Back off!" Damien screamed, using my sister as a human shield. "I'll kill her! I'll rip her throat out right now!" Sienna clawed uselessly at his massive arm, her eyes wide with mortal terror. "Charlotte! Charlotte, help me, please!" Leon and Wyatt paused, their muscles tense, waiting for my command. They didn't care about Sienna. If I said the word, they would let Damien end her, and then tear him apart. The choice was entirely mine. I looked at the woman who had poisoned me, the woman who had watched me choke on my own blood so she could steal my life. It would be so easy to let karma finish the job. But I wasn't her. I wasn't a monster. And I wouldn't let Damien have the satisfaction of taking another life. "Wyatt," I said, my voice cutting through the panic of the room. "The knee." Wyatt didn't hesitate. With a burst of speed that defied physics, he closed the distance. Before Damien could even twitch his claw, Wyatt drove a brutal, sweeping kick into the side of Damien's right knee. The sound of the joint snapping backward echoed like a gunshot. Damien shrieked in agony, his grip on Sienna breaking as his leg collapsed underneath him. Sienna fell to the floor, scrambling away on her hands and knees, weeping uncontrollably. Leon stepped forward, grabbing Damien by the throat and lifting the massive 300-pound tiger beastman off the ground with one hand. Damien clawed at Leon's iron grip, his face turning purple, his amber eyes bulging. "The Shifter Council is waiting in the lobby," Leon said, his voice a dark, terrifying rumble. "Reginald Finch just handed them the ledgers proving you've been trafficking illegal silver and funding rogue packs. You're going to a deep earth cell in the Badlands, Rousseau. You'll never see the sky again." Leon threw Damien to the ground like a piece of trash. The tiger beastman lay there, clutching his shattered knee, whimpering in absolute defeat. I walked slowly across the ruined penthouse, my boots crunching on broken glass. I stopped in front of Sienna. She was huddled against the wall, shaking violently, staring at me with a mixture of terror and overwhelming shame. I knelt down so I was at eye level with her. "You killed me for this, Sienna," I whispered, so quietly only she could hear. Her breath hitched, her eyes widening in horrific realization. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place for her. She realized I remembered. She realized I knew exactly what she had done in the past life, and that this entire sequence of events wasn't just luck. It was my orchestrated retribution. "Charlotte." She choked out, unable to form words through her panic. "I could have let him kill you," I said softly. But death is too easy. Death is a release. You're going to live, Sienna. You're going to live the rest of your life knowing you threw away the kings of this world. You're going to live as a disgraced, markless Omega in a town that owns you. That is your punishment. I stood up, turning my back on her without another word. Leon and Wyatt stepped to my sides, their hands gently resting on the small of my back, guiding me toward the elevator. The doors closed, shutting out the pathetic whimpers of the ruined beast and the broken sister who had tried to play God. 6 months later, the Cresthaven Town Hall looked entirely different than it had on the day of the mating draft. The cheap banners and harsh fluorescent lights were gone, replaced by cascading white roses, crystal lighting, and an atmosphere of absolute reverence. The entire shifter hierarchy of the state was in attendance. Alpha Pack leaders from 3 different time zones sat in the front rows, their heads bowed respectfully. The Shifter Council elders stood on the raised dais, wearing their ceremonial robes. Today wasn't a draft. It was a coronation. I stood in front of the floor-to-length mirror in the bridal suite, adjusting the intricate silver diadem resting in my hair. I was wearing a custom, breathtaking gown woven from silver thread and white silk, designed to mirror the iridescent coats of my lichen mates. There was a soft knock on the door, and Reginald Finch entered, dabbing his eyes with a silk handkerchief. "It's time, Luna Charlotte," he smiled, his voice thick with emotion. "The kings are waiting." I took a deep breath, smoothing down the front of my dress, and walked out of the suite. As I entered the main hall, the massive crowd rose to their feet in absolute silence. The only sound was the soft rustle of expensive fabrics and the faint, powerful hum of latent magic in the room. At the end of the aisle stood Leon and Wyatt. They looked like literal deities. They wore matching, impeccably tailored black suits with silver accents. Their shoulders were impossibly broad, their posture commanding, their auras radiating a warm, protective heat that blanketed the entire hall. When their eyes locked onto mine, the breath caught in my throat. The sheer, overwhelming wave of love, devotion, and primal possession that slammed into me through our mate bond was intoxicating. I walked down the aisle, every step pulling me further away from the nightmare of my past life and deeper into the glorious reality of my present. I remembered the cold marble floor where I had died. I remembered the metallic taste of poison. I remembered the suffocating terror of Damien Rousseau's cage. Damien was currently rotting in a subterranean prison, his assets seized, his name erased from the city's history. Sienna was working minimum wage at a local diner on the outskirts of town. She had been stripped of her pack status, living in a tiny, cramped apartment. Every time she looked out her window, she saw the towering skyline of Blackwell Enterprises. She was forced to watch my reign every single day, a prisoner of her own greed and envy. I reached the altar, placing my hands in Leon and Wyatt's waiting palms. The sparks of the mate bond danced across our skin, visible to the naked eye, a testament to the ancient magic that bound us together. Before the council and the ancestors, Mayor Hamilton proclaimed, his voice echoing through the silent hall, "We recognize the awakening of the Silvermane bloodline. We recognize Alpha Leon and Alpha Wyatt Blackwell." He turned to me, bowing his head deeply. "And we bow to the anchor of their power. We bow to Luna Charlotte. May her reign be long, and may her heart guide the kings." Leon leaned in, his lips brushing against my ear. "You saved us from the dark, Charlotte," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "We are yours, in this life and every life after." Wyatt kissed my knuckles, his hazel eyes glowing with fierce promise. "We'll burn the world down to keep you warm, little bird." I looked at my 2 magnificent kings, my heart overflowing with a fierce, triumphant joy. Sienna had tried to write my tragedy, but she had only handed me the pen to write my own epic. I was reborn, I was loved, and I was absolute. I smiled, squeezing their hands tight. Let's rule the world. What a wild ride, right? From being poisoned by her own twin sister to becoming the undisputed Luna of 2 billionaire lichen kings, Charlotte's revenge was nothing short of legendary. Sienna thought she was stealing a glittering future, but she ended up locking herself in a cage with a monster, while Charlotte turned the town, rejects, into absolute royalty. If you love this dramatic tale of rebirth, sweet karma, and epic werewolf romance, you definitely don't want to miss what we have coming next. Hit that like button if you think Sienna got exactly what she deserved. Share this story with your friends who love a good revenge plot, and make sure to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you never miss out on our daily dose of spicy, dramatic shifter storytelling. Drop a comment below who was your favorite twin, Leon or Wyatt. See you in the next one.